Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/BrianEDenton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 177. Chapter 177. It was nearly 3 o'clock, but no one was yet asleep, when the quartermaster appeared with an order to move on to the little town of Ostrovna. Still laughing and talking, the officers began hurriedly getting ready and again boiled some muddy water in the samovar. But Rostov went off to his squadron without waiting for tea. Day was breaking, the rain had ceased, and the clouds were dispersing. It felt damp and cold, especially in clothes that were still moist. As they left the tavern in the twilight of the dawn, Rostov and Ilyin both glanced under the wet and glistening leather hood of the doctor's cart, from under the apron of which his feet were sticking out, and in the middle of which his wife's nightcap was visible and her sleepy breathing audible. "She really is a dear little thing," said Rostov to Ilyin, who was following him. "A charming woman," said Ilyin, with all the gravity of a boy of 16. Half an hour later, the squadron was lined up on the road. The command was heard to mount, and the soldiers crossed themselves and mounted. Rostov, riding in front, gave the order "Forward!" and the hussars, with clanking sabers and subdued talk, their horses' hoofs splashing in the mud, defiled in fours, and moved along the road planted with birch trees on each side, following the infantry and a battery that had gone out in front. Tattered, blue-purple clouds, reddening in the east, were scudding before the wind. It was growing lighter and lighter. That curly grass, which always grows by country roadsides, became clearly visible, still wet with the night's rain. The drooping branches of the birches, also wet, swayed in the wind and flung down bright drops of water to the side. The soldiers' faces were more and more clearly visible. Rostov, always closely followed by Ilyin, rode along the side of the road between the two rows of birch trees. When campaigning, Rostov allowed himself the indulgence of riding not a regimental, but a Cossack horse. A judge of horses and a sportsman, he had lately procured himself a large, fine, mettlesome Donets horse, dun-colored, and with light mane and tail, and when he rode it, no one could outgallop him. To ride this horse was a pleasure to him, and he thought of the horse, of the morning, of the doctor's wife, but not once of the impending danger. Formerly, when going into action, Rostov had felt afraid. Now he had not the least feeling of fear. He was fearless, not because he had grown used to being under fire, one cannot grow used to danger, but because he had learned how to manage his thoughts when in danger. He had grown accustomed, when going into action, to think about anything but what would seem most likely to interest him, the impending danger. During the first period of his service, hard as he tried, and much as he reproached himself with cowardice, he had not been able to do this, but with time it had come of itself. Now he rode beside Ilyin under the birch trees, occasionally plucking leaves from a branch that met his hand, sometimes touching his horse's side with his foot, or, without turning around, handing a pipe he had finished to a hussar riding behind him, with as calm and careless an air as though he were merely out for a ride. He glanced with pity at the excited face of Ilyin, who talked much and in great agitation. He knew from experience the tormenting expectation of terror and death the cornet was suffering, and knew that only time could help him. As soon as the sun appeared in a clear strip of sky beneath the clouds, the wind fell, as if it dared not spoil the beauty of the summer morning after the storm. Drops still continued to fall, but vertically now, and all was still. The whole sun appeared on the horizon and disappeared behind a long narrow cloud that hung above it. A few minutes later it reappeared, brighter still from behind the top of the cloud, tearing its edge. Everything grew bright and glittered, and with that light, and as if in reply to it, came the sound of guns ahead of them. Before Rostov had had time to consider and determine the distance of that firing, Count Osterman, Tolstoy's adjutant, came galloping from Visbek with orders to advance at a trot along the road. The squadron overtook and passed the infantry and the battery, which had also quickened their pace, rode down a hill, and passing through an empty and deserted village, again ascended. The horses began to lather and the men to flush. "Halt! Dress your ranks!" The order for the regiment commander was heard ahead. "Forward by the left! Walk! March!" came the order from in front. And the hussars, passing along the lines of troops on the left flank of our position, halted behind our Ulians, who were in the front line. To the right stood our infantry in a dense column. They were in the reserve. Higher up the hill, on the very horizon, our guns were visible through the wonderfully clean air, brightly illuminated by slanting morning sunbeams. In front, beyond a hollow dale, could be seen the enemy's columns and guns. Our advance line, already in action, could be heard briskly exchanging shots with the enemy in the dale. At these sounds, long unheard, Rostov's spirits rose, as at the strains of the merriest music. Trap-ta-tap, trap-ta-tap, cracked the shots, now together, now several quickly, and one after the other. Again all was silent, and then again it sounded as if someone were walking on the detonators and exploding them. The hussars remained in the same place for about an hour. A cannonade began. Count Osterman, with his suite, rode up behind the squadron, halted, spoke to the commander of the regiment, and rode up the hill to the guns. After Osterman had gone, a command rang out to the Ulians. "Form column, prepare to charge." The infantry in front of them parted into platoons to allow the cavalry to pass. The Ulians started, the streamers of their spears fluttering, and trotted downhill toward the French cavalry which had been seen down below to the left. As soon as the Ulians descended the hill, the hussars were ordered up the hill to support the battery. As they took the places vacated by the Ulians, bullets came from the front, whining and whistling, but fell spent without taking any effect. The sounds, which he had not heard for so long, had an even more pleasurable and exhilarating effect on Rostov than the previous sound of firing. Drawing himself up, he viewed the field of battle opening out before him from the hill, and with his whole soul followed the movement of the Uhlans. They swooped down close to the French dragoons. Something confused happened there amid the smoke, and 5 minutes later our Uhlans were galloping back, not to the place they had occupied, but more to the left, and among the orange-colored Uhlans on chestnut horses, and behind them, in a large group, blue French dragoons on gray horses could be seen. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 177. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, Day 177. Before a Blowing Wind. Experience is the educator without a lectern. Early in James Joyce's Ulysses, Stephen Dedalus peerlessly instructs his students on the victories of Pyrrhus, helps them through Milton's poetry, and then assists one particular student with his arithmetic. After that, Stephen goes to visit the headmaster, Mr. Deasy, to collect his wages. While there, Mr. Deasy notes that Dedalus doesn't seem content merely teaching at a school. What does he want to do? Mr. Deasy asks. After some thought, Stephen replies that instead of a teacher, he'd prefer instead to be a learner. To learn, one must be humble, Mr. Deasy responds, but life is the great teacher. This is a lesson Nicholas Rostov has been learning lately. Tolstoy makes this explicit in today's chapter as Nicholas and his new friend Ilian decamp and make for Ostrovna. They know they're heading towards battle, but Rostov isn't bothered by it. Not at all. This is a major contrast to how he used to feel while riding out to battle. Back then, the proximity to war filled him with fear. Not so anymore. Today, he is fearless. This change in attitude is not due to mere experience with battle. It's actually because he has learned to manage his thoughts when in danger. Or, in Stoic terms, he no longer offers assent to his impressions. And, just as old Marcus, Seneca, and Epictetus predict, his mind, when so properly ordered, becomes a mind of calmness and tranquility. This tranquility is similar to how nature is presented in today's chapter. We've discussed previously how Tolstoy often paints a prose natural landscape in close proximity to a scene of battle. He's at it again today. Before the battle begins, we get 2 solid paragraphs describing the expansive countryside as Nicholas and Ilian trot along to war. Our previous thinking on this is that Tolstoy wants to present nature's indifference to the small and evanescent travails of mankind. Perhaps he's up to something else, though, today. Perhaps he's saying that nature provides the model for how best to respond to the vicissitudes of life. This is, after all, the lesson Nicholas has learned. He's heading toward danger without a care in the world, his mind instead focused on plucking leaves from passing trees and smoking a pipe as if he were merely on a rocking chair on his front porch watching the sunset. Nature, like Nicholas's mind, is indifferent. Below the sky, French and Russian armies senselessly slaughter each other, and all the while, blue-purple clouds redden towards the east and scuttle before a blowing wind. The lesson life teaches Nicholas here is that in order to achieve mental tranquility, he must elevate his mind to be in accordance with nature. Daily meditation. Now the distinguishing marks of a high spirit are composure and serenity, and a lofty disregard of insult and injury. Seneca, on clemency. And that concludes my reading and reflection on chapter 177 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember, if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation to PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the show notes. Tomorrow, we're going to be reading and reflecting on chapter 178 of War and Peace. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.